If I told you that you could triple your harvest this year, not by planting more pots, not by buying a bigger yard, but by fixing 12 tiny mistakes almost every container gardener is making right now, would you believe me? Because that's exactly what university trials keep proving over and over. Same pot, same seed, same sunlight, but one grower pulls in a basket of tomatoes, and the other pulls in 3 baskets. The difference isn't luck. It's not a green thumb. It's science. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what that science is. 1. Container size and depth. So let's start with the biggest one. The one that decides everything else before you even plant a seed. Your container size. Here's the thing nobody tells you. When a plant's roots hit the wall of the pot, literally, physically hit a rigid plastic wall, the plant panics. That root tip senses a pressure and starts pumping out a stress hormone called abscisic acid. That hormone travels straight up into the leaves and tells the stomata, the tiny pores that breathe in carbon dioxide, to slam shut. Less CO2 and means less photosynthesis. Less photosynthesis means less sugar for flowers and fruit. Your plant isn't lazy. It's suffocating from the inside, and it's happening because of a decision you made before you even added soil. And there's a second, sneakier problem hiding at the bottom of every pot. Something called a perch water table. At the base of any container, water and gravity fight to a standstill, and a soggy, oxygen-starved zone forms right where the roots need to breathe. In a shallow pot, that soggy zone can take up almost the entire root system. In a tall pot, it's pushed way down, leaving most of the soil beautifully aerated. This isn't a small effect. A meta-analysis of 65 separate container trials found that simply doubling your pot's volume increased yield by an average of 43%. Tomatoes move from 5-gallon buckets into 15-gallon containers, gain up to 40% more fruit weight and count. Meanwhile, cramming a big vegetable into anything under 12 inches deep can cost you up to 35% of your entire season's harvest. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a good year and a disappointing one, decided entirely by the size of the bucket. So the rule is simple. Big fruiting plants like tomatoes need 15 to 25 gallons and at least 18 to 24 inches of depth. Peppers and eggplants are happy with 5 gallons and 12 inches. But shallow-rooted things like lettuce, onions, garlic, and basil actually do great in smaller pots. So don't waste a big container on them. And whatever you do, don't fill that container with heavy backyard topsoil. It compacts hard inside pot walls and chokes out the air your roots need. Go with a light mix. Something like 60% peat or coir, 30% compost, 10% perlite. Now, once you got the right size container, what you build it out of matters just as much. And this next one sounds almost backwards. 2. Fabric grow bag air pruning. Here's what happens in a normal plastic pot. A root tip grows outward, hits that smooth plastic wall, and instead of stopping, it just keeps circling around and around inside of the pot. You end up with a tangled, woody root mass that's terrible at actually absorbing water and nutrients. Fabric grow bags flip that completely. When a root hits the porous fabric wall, it's exposed to air and the tip naturally dries out and stops growing. Right there. But here's the beautiful part. That stop root tip sends a signal back to the plant that says grow more roots right here, right now. So instead of one root wandering in a circle, you get dozens of new branching roots exploding out from that point. The result is a dense, fibrous root system that's dramatically better at pulling in water and nutrients from every inch of the pot. The numbers back this up hard. Growers using 10-gallon fabric bags saw up to 38% higher tomato yields and 52% fewer pests and disease problems compared to identical plastic buckets. In one Chicago rooftop trial, tomatoes in fabric bags grew 3 times the root mass of plants in rigid plastic pots and produced 30% more harvested fruit. Fabric bags are cheap, they fold flat for winter, and if you're in a hot, dry climate, the breathable fabric even helps cool the roots through evaporation. Just remember to water 20 to 30% more often, since air is also moving moisture out, and always elevate the bag off with decks or carpet, because that moisture will wick out and cause rot underneath. So you got the right container and the right material. But there's still one massive variable most gardeners get catastrophically wrong, over and over, all season long: watering. And this is where things get really interesting, because the way most of us water, soak it heavy, then let it dry out, then soak it again, is actually one of the most damaging things you can do to a container plant. Right after watering, the soil is drowning and the roots can't breathe. As it dries, the roots start desperately fighting for the last bit of moisture. Then you flood it again. It's a constant whiplash of stress. 3. Sub-irrigated planters, self-watering pots. A sub-irrigated planter, a self-watering pot, solves this by feeding water from a reservoir at the bottom, pulled upward through capillary action exactly as fast as the plant uses it. No flood, no drought, just a stable, continuous supply. And the yield data on this one is honestly stunning. Container tomatoes in a self-watering system produce 10.6 kilograms of fruit per plant, compared to 9.5 kilograms with regular drip irrigation, while using up to 9 times less water to do it. Some trials measured 300 to 460 grams of fruit for every liter water in an SIP system versus just 50 grams per liter with drip in a Brooklyn urban farming trial. Peppers grown in self-watering systems produce 50% more harvestable weight and needed 35% less labor. You can buy a commercial version or build one yourself with 2 nested 5-gallon buckets, a wicking cup, a filled tube, and an overflow hole. It's a genuinely simple weekend project. Just one thing to watch, because water only ever moves upward in these systems. Fertilizer salts build up at the very top of the soil instead of washing out. So flush the container with plain water from the top once a year to keep that from becoming a problem. Now, you can get the watering perfect, the container perfect, the roots perfect, and still lose your whole crop to something happening completely outside the soil. Something baking your roots alive without you ever seeing it. 4. Root zone temperature control. Let's talk about heat. On a hot summer afternoon, a standard black plastic pot can hit internal temperatures over 133 degrees Fahrenheit. And once root zone temperature crosses 95 degrees, things start breaking down fast. Cell membranes start leaking. Root respiration spikes and burns through the plant's sugar reserves. The proteins responsible for absorbing water start to denature. And if it briefly hits 113 degrees, roots on the sun-facing side of the pot can simply die. In one Tennessee nursery trial, plants in black pots spent 6 to 7 times more hours above the critical heat threshold than plants in white pots with simple afternoon watering cycle. And the white pot plants ended up with double the root mass and 32% better crop quality. So here's what actually works. Paint dark pots white or switch to white containers, especially if you're in a hot region. If you've got a high-value plant, try pot in pot. Burying a slightly bigger empty pot in the ground and setting your planter inside it for insulation. On concrete, double pot with insulating perlite in the gap, and always raise pots off hot pavement. And here's a detail almost nobody thinks about. If your pots use those slow-release fertilizer pellets, extreme heat can cause them to suddenly dump their entire nutrient load at once, burning your roots overnight. Keep that in mind before you assume the heat is the only threat. All right, soil, roots, water, temperature. You've covered the physical environment, but there's a whole invisible partnership happening underground that most gardeners never even think to activate. 5. Mycorrhizal fungi AMF inoculation. I'm talking about fungi, specifically arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, AMF. When you inoculate your potting soil with this, the fungus actually merges with the plant's roots and sends out microscopic threads, thinner than a root hair, that can squeeze into soil pores your plant's own roots could never reach. Those threads release acids that unlock phosphorus that would otherwise be completely stuck in the soil and pipe it straight back to the plant. In exchange, the plant shares up to 20% of the sugar it makes through photosynthesis. It's a full-on underground trade deal. The results are hard to ignore. Commercial trials found a 63% increase in total edible yield with mycorrhizal inoculation. under low phosphorus conditions. Inoculated pepper plants performed just as well as plants that got a full dose of phosphorus fertilizer. It's essentially a free upgrade to your root system. Tomatoes, peppers, onions, garlic, cucumbers, and squash all benefit enormously. Apply it once, right in the transplant hole, making sure it touches the root ball. But there's one crucial exception you need to know. Broccoli, cabbage, kale, and other brassicas physically cannot form this partnership. Don't waste it on them. And here's the trap that ruins this for a lot of people. If you dose your soil with high phosphorus fertilizer right after inoculating, the plant senses it doesn't need the fungus anymore and shuts the whole partnership down. So hold off on heavy phosphorus feeding for the first couple weeks. You fed the roots from below. Now let's talk about feeding the entire plant with something pulled straight from the ocean. 6. Kelp and seaweed biostimulants. Seaweed and kelp extract. This isn't a fertilizer in the traditional sense. It's more like a hormone cocktail. Kelp extracts are naturally loaded with cytokinins, which delay leaf aging and boost chlorophyll, auxins, which stimulate root branching, and betaines, which protect the plant cells from collapsing during sudden dry spells. One massive analysis covering over 1,000 experiments found seaweed extract increased crop yields by an average of 16.3%. But some individual results go way beyond that average. Lettuce trials recorded 68 to 81% higher harvest weight, and tomato greenhouse trials saw fruit count rise 10% and total fruit weight rise 17%, with earlier ripening on top of that. The application is simple. Dilute a cold processed kelp concentrate to about 5 to 10 milliliters per liter for a root drench once a week, or a lighter 3 milliliters per liter for a foliar spray. Just don't go overboard. Doses above 20 milliliters per liter have actually been shown to backfire, stunting roots and cutting flower counts instead of boosting them. More is not better here. So now your plant has healthy roots, stable water, cool temperatures, a fungal nutrient network, and a hormone boost. But none of that matters if the actual meal, the fertilizer, isn't showing up on time. 7. Liquid fertigation. This is where most people are still doing it wrong with dry granules. Dry fertilizer has to slowly dissolve and break down before the plant can use it. And in a fast-draining container, a huge amount of it just washes straight out the drainage holes before the roots ever get a chance. Liquid fertigation. Feeding highly diluted nutrients directly through your watering routine skips that entire delay. The nutrients are already in the exact ionic form the roots absorb instantly. The yield data here is significant. Fertigation increased potato yields by 40.3%, fruiting crop yields by 13.7%, and processing tomato yields by 21%, while cutting required nitrogen inputs by up to a third, because so much less of it gets wasted through leaching. The method: dilute your liquid fertilizer to half or even a quarter strength. Apply it every 7 to 14 days until you see a little runoff from the drainage holes, and flush with plain water every 4th watering to prevent salt buildup. One warning worth repeating: applying full-strength liquid fertilizer to dry soil can spike salinity so fast that it actually pulls water out of roots instead of in, causing scorched leaves and total flower drop almost overnight. Alright, that covers everything happening below the soil line and around the roots. Now let's flip to what's happening above ground. Starting with the crop almost everyone underestimates: leafy greens. 8. Cut and come again harvesting. Because most people are harvesting lettuce completely wrong. The typical approach is to grow a plant to full size, cut the whole thing down, pull the roots, and start over from seed, which means weeks of empty pot time doing nothing. The smarter method is called cut and come again. Harvest only the outer, older leaves, and leave the central growing point completely untouched. Why does this work so well? Because that central point is the plant's growth engine, and the root system stays fully intact and functional. Instead of rebuilding an entire plant from scratch, the plant just pours its energy straight into regrowing leaves. Fast. The yield comparison here is one of the biggest numbers in this whole video. Cut and come again harvesting produced 78% more cumulative yield than the cut it all at once method. 744 grams per tray versus 418 grams. and it supports 3 to 5 full harvest cycles from a single planting, using 6 times fewer seeds and trays for the same total weight of greens. The technique is simple. Once outer leaves reach about 4 inches, snap them off near the base, always leaving at least 4 to 5 inner leaves around the crown untouched. Feed with a diluted high nitrogen liquid right after each harvest, and come back again in 10 to 14 days. Just don't cut too low. If you damage that central crown, the plant can't regrow at all. The stem rots and the roots die back, so your greens can now produce for months instead of weeks. But over in your tomato and pepper pots, there's a completely different problem happening. One that has nothing to do with soil, water, or fertilizer at all. 9. Manual hand pollination. It's about pollination. And on a balcony or a covered patio, this is where a huge percentage of potential harvest quietly disappears. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants have perfect flowers with both male and female parts built in, but the pollen is trapped inside a tight little cone and can only be released by vibration. Outdoors, wind and buzzing bumblebees do this for free. But indoors, on a balcony, behind a screen, that vibration never happens. The flower just yellows and drops off without ever setting fruit. Growers call this blossom drop, and it can silently wipe out 80% of your flowers before you even notice. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. An electric toothbrush. Turn it on. Press the flat back of the head against the stem right behind the flower cluster, not the petals, for 2 to 3 seconds. You'll actually see a small puff of pollen release. Do this every 2 to 3 days, during midday on warm, low-humidity days, because extreme heat or humidity above 80% can make pollen clump up or die before it ever gets a chance. One Florida container gardener using this method went from losing 80% of blossoms to successfully setting fruit on 95% of them. So your flowers are setting fruit reliably now. But as your plant keeps growing bigger and bushier, there's a hidden drain happening at the bottom of the plant that's quietly stealing sugar away from that fruit. 10. Bottom pruning. It's time to talk about pruning the bottom of the plant. And this is different from the pruning myth you probably heard. As your plant's canopy fills in, the lowest leaves end up buried in shade. Once a leaf gets too little light, it stops being a sugar producer and actually starts being a sugar consumer. It burns more energy than it makes. Worse, that low, shaded, damp zone near the soil is the perfect breeding ground for fungal diseases like early blight, which splash up in the soil every time you water. Removing those bottom leaves does 2 things at once. It stops the energy drain, and it cuts off the disease pathway. In an Illinois extension trial, bottom pruned tomato plants produced up to 40% more harvestable fruit by weight than unpruned plants, which lost over half their foliage to blight in the same humid August weather. Once your plant hits about 24 inches and starts flowering, clean and sanitize your shears. Then remove all the leaves and side shoots from the bottom 12 inches of the stem, or down to 6 to 8 inches for super hot peppers. But here's the critical distinction. This is not the same as topping a young pepper plant by cutting off its main growing tip. That's a popular myth, and the actual research shows topping delays fruiting, stunts the plant, and produces weak branches that snap under fruit weight, with 0 long-term yield benefit. Bottom pruning helps. Topping hurts. Don't confuse the two. Now, even with perfect pruning, perfect pollination, and everything else dialed in, there's still one disorder that can ruin a tomato or pepper crop right at the finish line, and it has nothing to do with what you'd expect. 11. Moisture stabilization to prevent blossom end rot. Blossom end rot. That ugly, sunken, black scar on the bottom of fruit is caused by a localized calcium shortage. But here's the twist. It's almost never because there's not enough calcium in your soil. Calcium can only move through the plant passively, riding along with water through the transpiration stream. It cannot be actively redirected like other nutrients. So the moment your soil dries out and the plant closes its stomata to conserve water, calcium delivery to the fruit simply stops, even if there's plenty of calcium sitting right there in the pot. This is why moisture consistency matters so much more than most people realize. Trials show that keeping substrate moisture stable in that optimal range can cut blossom end rot by up to 70%. So do the daily heft test. Lift the pot and get a feel for its weight, or just poke a finger 2 inches into the soil. Water slowly until it drains on the bottom, and never let the pot sit in standing water for more than 30 minutes. And please, do not reach for Epsom salt to fix this. It's a myth that refuses to die. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, and magnesium actually competes with calcium for the same absorption pathways in the root. Adding it can make blossom end rot worse, not better. Raw eggshells won't help either. They take years to break down, far too slow to matter this season. We're almost at the finish line, and this last one ties every single piece we've covered together into one simple layer on top of the soil. 12. Surface mulching. Mulch. An exposed soil surface in a container loses water to evaporation fast, and that constant drying kills off the shallow feeder roots living in the top few inches, right where your compost and slow-release fertilizer are concentrated. A simple mulch layer cuts that evaporation by roughly 50%, keeping that whole zone consistently moist and those feeder roots alive and working. It also stops heavy rain from blasting nutrients straight out the drainage holes. The yield impact is real. Mulch plants can grow at twice the rate of bare soil plants, harvest 2 to 14 days earlier, and in tomato trials, synthetic mulch increased marketable yield by an average of 19.6%. Organic mulch, straw, shredded bark, finished compost, works great. Just leave a small gap around the stem to avoid rot. In cooler northern regions, black plastic mulch warms the soil early in the season. In hot southern regions, flip to white on black film, which reflects heat instead of trapping it. And one bonus detail for master gardeners. Red plastic mulch under tomatoes actually reflects a specific wavelength of light back up into the canopy that pushes the plant to prioritize sweeter, earlier ripening fruit. So that's all 12. Bigger, well-matched containers. Fabric bags for stronger roots. Stable sub-irrigated watering. Cooler root zones. A mycorrhizal partnership underground. A kelp-based hormone boost. Liquid feeding instead of slow granules. Cut and come again harvesting for your greens. Hand pollination for your fruiting crops. Smart bottom pruning. Rock solid moisture consistency to stop blossom end rot. And a simple mulch layer holding it all together. Do even half of these well, and you're already ahead of most container gardeners. Do all 12, and you're looking at the kind of results university trials have documented. A genuinely tripled harvest from the exact same amount of space. But here's the thing, I only busted a couple of the biggest gardening myths in this video, because they came up naturally. There's still a bunch of others floating around out there that sound completely reasonable, that a lot of gardeners swear by, and that are actually working against you every single time you do them. Coffee grounds straight into your pots. Gravel at the bottom for better drainage. Mixing 3 different vegetables into one small container because you saw it online. If you want to know exactly why those don't hold up and what the research actually says to do instead, that's the next video you need to watch.